Assalomu alaykum barchaga. Bugun shanba 16-mart kuni O'zbek diasporaning 44-sonida ko'rishib turganimizdan juda ham xursandmiz. Bugun o'zgacha kun, bir o'zgacha intervyu bo'lib o'tishini kutyapmiz. Boisi bugun virtual studiyamizda noodatiy mehmon, ya'ni odatda xorijdagi o'zbekistonlik professionallar bilan suhbatlashamiz. Bugun esa shuni aksi bo'ladi, ya'ni O'zbekistondagi xorijlik mehmon Mark Riz bilan suhbat bo'lib o'tadi. Faqat bugun ingliz tilida ko'proq suhbat olib borishga harakat qilamiz, lekin suhbatdoshimiz o'zbek tilini ham yaxshi biladi. Albatta bir-ikki o'zbek so'zlarni kutib qolamiz. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Ramazan Mubarak bo'lsin. Sizning taklifnomingiz uchun kattakon rahmat, men xursandman. Mening hammasi mening o'zbek do'stlarim assalom aytmoqchimanki, sizlar ham Ramazon uchun muborak bo'lsin.
Rahmat. Keling endi suhbat tiniqroq bo'lishi uchun baribir ingliz tilidan foydalanamiz. Let's switch to English. Good morning, Mark.
Thank you. Good morning.
Interview to Uzbek diaspora. Where are you based in at the moment?
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. My parents have lived here for about 30 years now. And that's just the place that we've called home for about the past 7 years.
7 years. Okay. Wow. That's wow. All right. How's the weekend been so far?
Well, good. I mean, we're just now finishing Dunyoning Ishlari, a team that I sort of formed over the past 3 years. We've been working very hard on rendering it into English. And literally just before this interview, I got the formatted version of the book to go through and make changes with the design person. So I'm anticipating that'll be out sometime the 31st of March.
Oh, pretty soon.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I'm tired of this project.
Yeah.
I want to get it out. I want to get the baby out into the world so that it can grow.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot of mental work, but awesome. Good for you. And how's the weather today out there? Are you enjoying it?
It's great. I mean, you're in Florida, so you wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But in the South, March is kind of this sort of bridge season. One day cold, one day warm. But I'm out in my mom's garden. When we're done here, I'm gonna plant a rose bush for her, and get the flowers ready for spring and summer.
Awesome! Wow, you got a lot of hobbies, huh?
I try to stay busy. Yeah, we're also when I'm done with the rose bush, we're gonna drive down to Oxford, Mississippi, one of the great literary centers of America. As you know, William Faulkner is from Oxford, Mississippi. Harper Lee, I think Truman Capote may have been from Mississippi or from Alabama. So my wife and son, we're going to drive down there, spend the night, and then go to Faulkner's house on Sunday.
Interesting. Very excited for you. Okay. What I was saying in Uzbek, I'm sure you understand that we usually interview people from Uzbekistan who live in a foreign country, right, abroad. But this time we have a unique guest who is a foreigner who happens to have lived in or is living. I mean, you go back and forth, or at least associated with Uzbekistan. And I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people, and I'm sure people will have a lot of questions after the interview, maybe during the interview as well. I'd like to encourage anyone who have joined or who is going to join to ask as many questions as possible. I'll definitely pull them up, and we'll answer the questions. Let me do a quick introduction of you and your professional background. Mark Riz has 30 years of experience developing programs focusing on education, content development, e-learning design in Central Asia and the United States. Beginning with his service in the United States Peace Corps as part of his second group to enter Uzbekistan, he worked in the Republic in various capacities, from teaching at a traditional Uzbek maktab to establishing academic programs centered around Islamic studies and curricular reform. Mark managed translation and cultural advisement task orders in Afghanistan, which is a neighboring country, right, and the United States for a broad spectrum of government and private industry clients. A noteworthy achievement was his development of a dynamic program as founding director for the Center for Regional Studies at the United States Naval Academy. Activities focused on content development for midshipman, midshipman education. To be honest, I don't know what that is. So
Yeah,
definitely,
we can talk about that. Yeah.
yes. He was awarded with the Presidential Order of Tinchlik by the Republic of Uzbekistan's president himself, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, for furthering awareness of the Uzbek language and culture through his translation of the beloved Uzbek novel O'tgan Kunlar, Bygone Days, right? His later awards include Uzbekistan's Tourism Fidaisi. Currently, he now advises United Cement Group on public relation activities. He anticipates releasing his second translation project in late March 2024, Otkir Khashimov's Dunyoning Ishlari, one of the very literally works that a lot of Uzbeks love. Let's start with some blitz questions just to warm it up.
Sure.
And then, we'll tap into your professional background and life in general. You served in the U.S. Army, right? Did you?
No, United States Peace Corps. So the Peace Corps was established in the early 1960s by John F. Kennedy, basically as cultural outreach and development work. We started in Africa and Latin America. And, when the Soviet Union fell apart, George Bush Sr. said, we want the Peace Corps in the Soviet Union, in the former Soviet Union. And
Right. Yeah.
as the anecdote goes, his advisor said, Mr. President, you're thinking Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, but there are new republics out there that nobody has any idea what they are. So he said, better yet, send them. Because really, the Peace Corps, nobody really does what the Peace Corps does in the U.S. government, which is to live among local nationals as a guest. And that's where I got my first teaching experience, was in Kokand in the 1990s. I did go to work. The Army was a client later on after 9/11 when I worked in Afghanistan. I was a translator for them, but I was never a uniformed member of the military.
Right. Very interesting. What's your favorite thing to do in the summertime?
That's a great one. So, I believe it or not, with all these media presentations and everything, I'm a kind of an introvert who forces himself out into the world to do good work. If I have my way with a day, I go and work out at 5:15 at a place called Iron Tribe, which is kind of a CrossFit light. I've had 2 spinal fusion surgeries. I have a very bad back. So staying fit is really important to me, especially in April, I turned 55. And then I like to go read. I like to write, sort of introspective types of things. I'm an older father. My son's 8 years old. So I absolutely positively love doing things with my son.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a father as well.
Yes.
Alongside like a lot of responsibilities that you have in life, you're a father. That's awesome. What are the names of the countries that border with Uzbekistan? Let's test your knowledge.
Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. I mentioned Turkmenistan, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
you mentioned that.
Yeah. So that's it, right? Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan.
And what is the biggest water reservoir, or whatever we call it? Like maybe it's a lake or sea. Some people say sea. What's the name?
Well, it used to be the Ural Sea. I don't know if that is still true. That's pretty grim. Yeah. But, and then you've got the 2 main water sources, the Amudar and the Sirdarya rivers.
Right.
So that was the Arabic term, Mawa Nahar, the land between 2 rivers provided by the Arabs. Yeah.
You know the history better than I do, for sure, no doubt.
I don't know about that. I just, graduate school gives you a bunch of useless knowledge. Maybe, I don't know. But
it doesn't seem like it's useless, so now they helped you. What are the main languages spoken in Afghanistan? I know that you lived in Afghanistan for about a couple of years.
Yeah.
So
Well,
what are the
it depends on where you're at. I mean,
right,
the of course there's Pashtun, there's Dari,
right,
Tajik, Hazara, Pashai. There's smaller languages that are really fascinating. Nuristani, for one of a better term, Baluch is a very interesting language that I absolutely know. And then, of course, there's Uzbek. And so when I went to go translate in Afghanistan, one of the advantages that I had was that I took 2 years of Persian during graduate school. So Russian was not is generally speaking, depending on where you're at, is not the cognate technical language of Afghan Uzbek. Right. The Russian influence is greater north of the border than it is south of the border. So when you get south of the border, the Uzbek it's got less of a Russian influence, if zero influence. So Persian is a highly useful language, no matter what language that you're speaking in Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan, yes, for sure, no doubt. And you know that there are maybe close to 5 million Uzbeks living in Afghanistan. I was just doing a little research, and I was surprised, to be honest. There's a lot of them. But
that in Turkmen.
Different. Yeah. Okay, next question. What's your level of Uzbek language? What do you think?
I challenge that whole term fluent. I think language ebbs and flows. Absolutely. And so I don't speak Uzbek on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And so, but we were just talking about this, is, that when I'm in Tashkent, after about 3 or 4 weeks, it really starts to pick up and really come back to me. Right. So I would say 20 years ago, when I was a graduate student living in Tashkent, or even before that with Peace Corps, I stone cold knew Kuchatilla. And that was very useful in Afghanistan, by the way. So what graduate school gave me at the University of Washington was more of an understanding of the literary language, and to be able to read Kunlar and literary Uzbek. And so I'm painfully slow in my reading. Again, I'm turning 55 years old. There's part of me that just says, man, I'm going to know what I'm going to know about Uzbek. You know what I mean? Like, I have no pretensions over any, So the other thing is, when I'm in Tashkent, even I'll know what the conversation is that's going on, but I will still insist on having a translator with me. Because I don't want to have to, when we're talking, I don't want to have to think about the nuances of the language to get my point across. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And so it's easier for both sides for them to not listen to Mark go from intermediate to advanced. During a meeting, it's just better to have a really good translator and get the meeting done.
Yep, absolutely. I can relate to it. It's super hard, especially like when you reach a certain age. Like for me, like I'm 30 years old and I'm trying to pick up Spanish because I live in Miami, right? Maybe 60% of the people probably speak are comfortable speaking Spanish, I guess, than English. So it's been super tough. I remember those days when I learned English, and it came easy because I was young. Like I was maybe 15 years old or something.
Yeah.
But now, like, you have work, you have a lot of stuff to do, and learning something new becomes harder. But
right.
Especially
with Miami, there's different Spanishes there. Cubano, and different influences. I grew up in Arizona, not far from the Mexico border. My high school was largely Hispanic. Right. And so I spoke really great Spanglish, and
the word actually,
I'm going to Mikado, but I grew up around guys who were mainly Mexican American. And so it wasn't a problem for me. And, when I'm listening to a Spanish TV program or hear people speaking, I understand about 90% of what they have to say. But I think the hill that I'm going to die on is really Russian. Not because I really don't buy the colonial idea that Russian is more difficult than Uzbek. You know, every Russian that I ever heard say Uzbek is easy language, it's just simple language. And I ask them, you know, well, do you speak it? Well, of course not. Well, then shut up. You know what I mean? You know, how can you say that the Turkic languages are more simple? That's just a colonial bullshit that they've been passing for 150 years. You know, all languages are difficult to learn. Anyone can learn how to ask for where the bathroom is, or order a meal, right? But when you know, people say Spanish is an easy language, and I would challenge them to go and read Gabriel Garcia Marquez in the original,
right?
And you tell me how easy you think it is.
Yep.
You know,
absolutely. Any language has its difficult parts and easier parts. Like, for example, when I was at college, I tried to pick up Chinese. It was super simple grammatically, but the pronunciation part is the hardest. Like, for example, one word like "ma," right, can be understood. Like, it has so many translations if you think about it. So,
right.
you know, for example, Russian. When it comes to Russian, I guess grammar is pretty hard. But pronunciation might be a little easier than Chinese or something. You know, like there's difficult parts, but there's easier parts to every language, I guess. That's at least my experience has been. And especially when I switched these interviews, Uzbek diaspora interviews, to Uzbek, I just realized that my level of Uzbek is not as high as I thought it was. Because speaking it fluently with no grammar mistakes, with the using the a little bit more complicated languages is hard. Professional language is hard. That's why I agree with you on that point. Like you mentioned that fluency can be subjective. Like everybody can understand fluency in different ways. So yeah. And next question, what's your favorite food and why?
Man, see, that's not fair. Because if I say something other than palav, I'm going to be dushman. But of course, Central Asian food. That's not me being a diplomat. Right. I guess the older I get, the more I'm conscientious about how much palav I eat. Sure. But man, I love some good Chagatai shashlik in Tashkent. And there's a Chaihana in Kokhan, Marrakesh. I don't know why they named it Marrakesh. Mm-hmm. By far the best palav I've ever had in my life. Just really good. But on a day-to-day basis, I'll look over at my wife and say, let's go get sushi. And I just love how complicated and sophisticated the Japanese are, and it's generally speaking clean food. Any sushi that has mayonnaise in it or on it, spicy mayonnaise or spicy anything, that's really an innovation from after World War II. With American soldiers being stationed in Japan, they would ask sushi to be modified to their tastes.
For real.
Yeah. So I try to eat things that haven't had that American influence.
Yep. There's a California style sushi, California roll, that's what they call it, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a different perception that people in America have. But when I talked to a Japanese person, sushi was a completely different type of food. I mean, like in America, we usually wrap it in what do you call it, in rice, right? But
right.
In Japan, it's totally different.
Right.
Okay, awesome. Alrighty, let's get into the part where we talk about your life when you were younger. Tell me about where you grew up, your early education until university years, and
that's going to be interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, the short answer, I was born in Gainesville, Florida, at the University of Florida. My father was, he went to University of Georgia first. He was born in South Georgia, basically on a farm. up until the age of 15, he did not have running water or electricity.
Right.
You could really call his family a Dacon, really traditional South Georgia family. And they're the big city for them is when they moved to Albany, Georgia. My mom was what was called an Air Force brat. So her father, my grandfather, was a Chief Warrant Officer 5, which is a rank that doesn't exist anymore. Right. So he was kind of like this real badass Air Force guy, like helped develop a bomb site during World War II. Right. He was under General LeMay, and then later on went to work at the Nevada test site during the Cold War. And so he knew all of the great test pilots. So my dad, because he grew up without electricity and water, the big innovation for him, he started out as an architect. He was very much a frustrated artist, but he had 3 kids. My mom and dad married when they were 16, 17 years old, which was too early. But so they married very early. They went to senior prom together, secretly married without my grandparents knowing.
Really?
So they were on their own at a very early age. It did not go over well with my grandparents. And so they went to the University of Florida to get out of the state of Florida. And all 3 kids were born in Gainesville. But the big innovation for my dad, because he went on to become an accountant, because he basically had to take care of 3 kids. I couldn't say that it was his favorite calling in life, but he was a man and he did what he needed to do to take care of his family. Right. So the big innovation for him was nuclear power. The idea that nuclear power could provide electricity to poor rural families for cheap really influenced him. It influenced another person from South Georgia as well, which was President Carter. Jimmy Carter grew up not far from my dad. So he when he went into the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Naval Academy, he was a nuclear submarine guy. So these people in the rural South really believed in nuclear power as a way to provide cheap, clean electricity to rural people. And so that's what he did. He worked at nuclear power plants. And we moved around quite a bit, from Florida to Georgia to New Hampshire to Ohio. And then finally, by the 7th grade, my mom really put her foot down and said, we're settling down for a while. The kids are moving every 2 to 3 years. This is not good for them. So we settled in a small town called Litchfield Park, Arizona, which had an enormous influence on my life. It's when I really made my first real childhood friends. I'm still in contact with him. We're still close. I mean, I was texting with him this morning. We're all in our 50s now. But, Litchfield Park was just this little picture post stamp right out in the middle of the desert. The U2 song where the streets have no name?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote that song because literally in Phoenix, when you go out and you follow these roads long enough, far enough into the desert, they don't have a name anymore on them. So Indian School Road becomes nothing out in the desert. So I literally lived out in the middle of the desert with cowboys and Mexicans. And nearby there was Luke Air Force Base, which was one of the largest Air Force bases in the United States. So I went to school with a lot of Air Force people. My Sunday school teacher at the time was a 4-star Air Force general. Really. So I had this really weird childhood. I went to a public school, which was one of the scariest high schools in Phoenix, but I love it to this day. And, you had to be a brawler on the west side of Phoenix. You had to be tough, and how you carried yourself really mattered. And so, I had a learning disability, a severe hearing loss when I was a kid. So sometimes in Tashkent, people will kind of look at me sideways when I ask them to repeat things 3 or 4 times because my hearing's not so great. So, I had to kind of overcome that. I was out on my own when I was 17. I put myself through college.
Mhm.
I paid my way through school with student loans and working 2 or 3 jobs during the day in order to make things meet. So one of the reasons I love Uzbekistan so much is that after it took me 7 years to get my undergraduate degree. I was out on my own. But when I finally got it, I applied for this thing called the Peace Corps.
Right.
And my Spanish was excellent at the time. And I thought that they were going to send me to Latin America.
Mhm.
And then I thought that they were going to send me to Africa. It usually takes about a year to get placed into a country.
Mhm.
And I finally got a letter in the mail that said, on behalf of the United States government, the United States Peace Corps, we'd like to invite you for training in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. And I'm like,
That's
so
great.
keep in mind, this is 1994.
Mhm.
And not long before that, we were watching Yeltsin standing on top of a tank.
Mhm.
So I found an atlas from the girls that lived above in the apartment above, and it was still a Soviet atlas. It showed Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kiev, and then Tashkent all the way down below, right above Afghanistan. And I thought, cool, man.
The way you really said, though?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, first I thought Uzbekistan was a typo. I thought, like, well, isn't this just like the U.S. government to put, isn't this East Pakistan? But if it's East Pakistan, isn't that Bangladesh? What is this place? And then, so when I found it on the atlas, I found the atlas, not the atlas, Mark.
Right.
I found Tashkent and Samarkand right above Afghanistan. I thought, cool, man. This is, I saw group 2.
Yeah.
And usually when you join the Peace Corps, you're group number 75 to go to Ghana since the 1960s, or to El Salvador, or to Guatemala.
Mhm.
But this was the second group to ever go to this new republic. There were no dictionaries, there were no maps, there was no grammar material, and I thought, this is kind of how I found myself and my feet at this point in my life. I realized that all this traveling around that I did when I was a kid really adapted me to deal with different people and just not judge.
Right. Right.
And in the 90s, as the 90s were very tough in the former Soviet Union.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of the kids today in Tashkent, they've got their cars and their cake factory and all these new things that are coming up in Uzbekistan. But I kind of want to tell them, like, hey man, you need to go hug your parents and your grandparents, because you have no idea what they went through in the 90s to get where Uzbekistan is today.
At the moment, yeah, for real. Sometimes, younger generation tend to take things for granted, but yeah, a lot of things changed. And it's interesting that, like, you went to, I think you mentioned you went to Samarkand in 1994, right?
Yes, that's where I studied Uzbek for 3
That's,
months.
yeah, that's when Uzbekistan was already an independent country, and that's back when actually I was born.
Oh, really? Great.
I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of what was going on back in the days. I was a little too young, but very interesting. So you were born in Gainesville, Florida. Times were different than
Yeah.
the days back in the days, right? There was
Yeah.
not much, like, technology wasn't as developed, and everything was different, right? And it's interesting to notice that you grew up in an environment where it kind of shaped your path in your future, right? So you mentioned that your teacher was an Air Force. What was the name?
Yeah, my Sunday school teacher was a 4-star Air Force general,
General, right?
and then the other one was a U.S. Navy admiral,
Okay.
the first commander of the SS Nautilus, like one of the great Cold War,
Mhm.
submarines, like
Mhm.
practically right out of Red October,
Right.
and they really had an enormous influence on me in
Hmm.
terms of how you behave as a man,
Hmm.
and how and so the joke about Episcopalians is that it's called Catholicism light,
Hmm.
and a lot of former presidents were Episcopalian.
Hmm.
It's the typical Anglachani ethnic background, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant WASP.
Right.
John McCain was Episcopalian from
Mhm.
Arizona. So when
Is that
you
what
think
it means? Episcopalian is the meaning? Like your
Episcopalian is basically part of the Church of England, or at one point
oh,
was part of the Church of England.
okay.
So my mom grew up in London for a good part of her life when she
Mhm.
was a kid. England is still very much part of our universe, So when I go through London, I think about where my mom lived and everything, and so I grew up in this typical WASP culture right out in the middle of Arizona. So we were kind of an island of wasps
Right.
in the sea of Latino culture. And
Mhm.
the high school that I went to, where a lot of kids in my town were going to private schools, my dad was like, I'm not paying for a private school. You're going to go to a public school. And I think that was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
It's very counterintuitive what you're saying, especially nowadays. A lot of people want to give their kids to private schools because they think the quality of education is better, and there's less conflicts at school because the people who go to private schools are from, in a sense, better families, right? They're well behaved or whatever you call it. But actually, there's a saying: adversity. I forgot. Adversity is a good thing, actually, right?
Yeah.
It helps people become stronger, and, and it's interesting. Also, you paid your way to through school, right?
Mhm.
Nobody was financing your school, etc. And you were kind of you were kind of a young independent man who decided what he wanted to do in the future, right? I really
Mhm.
like to tap into people's past because that's what shapes their future. That's why I want to go into details and discover who they are, and then everything else becomes a little bit more relatable, understandable. Um, very interesting. And next question is: I noticed that it wasn't a random choice that you developed a connection to Central Asia, when you applied for University of Washington 2001, you decided to major in Uralic, Altaic, Caucasian, Central Asian languages, literature, and linguistics. So that was a what do you call? That wasn't like a random decision that a lot of college kids make, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
for example, I studied economics, but what I currently do is different than economics, right? But you knew what you were going to do, I guess, at that point.
Well, so for undergrad, I went to Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, and I got a degree in English with a minor in Spanish. The
Hmm.
only thing I wanted to do in the world was teach English, and it was basically
Interesting.
a high school teacher that had an enormous influence on me, and I
Mhm.
kind of wanted to pay it forward. I was definitely a troubled child growing up,
Right.
and it was two teachers in high school that really took me aside and read me the law, man, on what you get your act together. And so I wanted to do what Mrs. Hendricks did, was help kids get past whatever challenges they had in that life. I'm still very passionate about it. But with Peace Corps, when I got placed in Kolkan,
Hmm.
it was one of the great sort of spiritual moments of my life.
Hmm.
In '95 for Hayat, I went to Yangi Juma Machet and prayed with thousands of men, said the Shahada. I'm a bit of a Sufi now, less Episcopalian, more Sufi Muslim. I don't drink alcohol. I just don't like what it does to people. I don't like drunks. And so, Uzbekistan kind of made me this interesting hybrid of a person, I think. But really, in the '90s, because there was so little language
Hmm.
materials available, and I was literally watching a republic form its national identity.
Hmm.
I was witnessing to a new republic developing itself and what it believed in. I had more questions than answers after 2.5 years in Peace Corps. What is it that I just saw and experienced? This is the mid 90s. There was a civil war in Tajikistan.
Sure.
There was a rise of a new group called the Taliban.
Right.
Right. There was this group called the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan. And I'm hearing this philosophy from the Taliban, but I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't resemble anything that I saw in Kokand in the 90s. Westerners, Americans were calling the Fergana Valley fundamentalist Central Asia, all of these terms that just didn't make any sense to the experience that I had lived in Kokand. And so I went to the University of Washington to try to answer those questions. I wanted to really master Uzbek. People back then, people are saying you're an idiot. You're not studying Russian. If you study Russian, you can work in Russia, you can work in Poland, you can work in Ukraine. And I kind of have to laugh about that now because those people didn't get that, Ukrainian was a separate language, But, I became this early ambassador to try to explain Uzbekistan to the rest of the world. And the University of Washington kind of gave me the academic tools to start understanding that. It was only because of 9/11 did I suddenly become marketable.
In the region or
at all? I was looking at a grim future as a graduate student at the University of Washington in Turkic languages. What was I going to do? I could go on to get a PhD and not find a job in academia, not make a living wage, especially living in Seattle, right? And then all of a sudden 9/11 occurs and Central Asia becomes strategically important. And that really launched a whole career for me. Hard to explain and understand, and
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And the reason why you picked that specific major was not only because you wanted to learn out of curiosity or whatever, but it was because you just realized that there's a little bit more demand for professionals who speak the local language in Uzbekistan, and you thought that you were going to be much more marketable if you speak the language. As far as
No, I did it completely out of the passion for trying to understand the region that had just given me so much for 2.5 years.
Right.
At that time, even at the University of Washington, people thought that students who learned Uzbek and Kazakh were stupid because what are you going to do with it? The Kazakhs don't even want to hire you if you speak Kazakh at that time, right? You need to speak Russian. So, but I wanted to learn Turkic, Persian languages. So I started graduate school actually in 1999, 2000. And then by 2001, when September 11th occurred, all of a sudden this whole new career path opened up for me. And so I went back to Tashkent and I managed to get the University of Washington a $1 million Department of State grant in Islamic studies. And then about 1.5 years into that, and just after graduating from grad school, I got a call from a contracting company and I became a translator at K2. Until Andijan occurred. When Andijan occurred and Uzbekistan and the United States had their divorce, all of a sudden I was in Afghanistan.
Very interesting. Sorry, a comment came up and I just wanted to pull it up. Thank you guys. Great talk. I'd like to have a talk with you, Hassan and Mark, talk with Uzbek youth in coming days. If you could just maybe send your contact information and provide more details and see what the context is, and
sure.
I would personally definitely be open to a conversation. Thanks for watching, guys. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section, and we'll definitely pull them up. Savollarınızı kaldırışıyla mümkün. Albatta okuyup değiştiririz. Okay, awesome. Let's move to the next question. Arizona State University, Mary Lowe Fulton Teachers College. 2020 and 2022, which is very recent, right?
Yeah.
After so many years, you left academia, you decided to go back to school, and you specialized in learning design and technologies,
Right.
which is a very interesting sphere, especially nowadays. That I think there's much more higher demand for e-learning and technologies. I don't know what you specifically did, but if you could just go into details of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the past 5 years, I've been developing this multimedia portfolio, a series of proposals. I've probably sent 2 or 3 dozen proposals to the Republic of Uzbekistan to try to get collaboration and everything. But what I really want to do is, since I translated Kunlar into English, is I'd really like to develop an online Qadiri course for diaspora students living abroad, Uzbeks that are growing up in America that maybe not know Ona Tilla, maybe want to learn more about their country of origin, their culture of origin. I think Kunlar is, and the reason I really wanted to finish the book is I think it's an excellent introduction for anyone who wants to know about the region. Is start with Kunlar first, end with the Soviet Union. Most people start with the Soviet Union, so that experience clouds their understanding of the region. Whereas I think if you look at Tashkent pre-conquest, you understand why the Jadids were so important, why, to me, they're the logical heroes of the Republic, because they died for it, right? Recently, the Jadid conference that was in December, there's cynics that will say that, this is just, more statecraft of using the Jadids to create these artificial heroes. So, but you could say the same thing about Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, people that I revere. We did the same thing. But what we did is we chose heroes that we decided to base our leadership principles upon.
Okay. Very interesting. I actually been observing this phenomenon in Uzbekistan. A lot of talks going on about like Jadids and everything lately, and Turkic languages, Turkic identity, etc. But it seems like it's not all unique to the Uzbek culture or Uzbek development as a nation, right? But it's pretty much it happened in America apparently, as you're saying, right? I mean, I took a class in American history, but it didn't tap into this details like this, for example.
Yeah, the nation state is an 18th century Enlightenment construct. Okay. And, get nervous when you get a German guy with a mustache talk about the ancient German people. All right. They didn't think of themselves as German 3,000 years ago. Okay. All right. So the nation state is an 18th century construct. All right. I'm not delegitimizing anyone's, the ancient peoples of anywhere. I'm just saying that we choose the symbols and the things that we believe in as a people, and we are still debating about that in America today. You are watching that with an indicted president. Is a president immune from prosecution? Can you hold a president legally accountable for his actions? And, I used to teach the Constitution to future Marine Corps and naval officers at the Naval Academy. Right. All right. I know a bit about the Constitution. And, and the framers of the Constitution said that we are all held accountable to the law. The law, the Constitution, is the law of the land. I don't worship a leader in America. I lived in Annapolis, Maryland. George Washington was offered a monarchy after the Revolution. He was offered a third term as president after his second term. In Annapolis, Maryland is when he resigned his commission as a general of the Continental Army. He's like, I am not going to be a monarch. And so what it means to be American is still being debated over 2 centuries later. So, of course, Uzbekistan is going to have an ongoing debate about what it means to be Muslim, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be married, what it means to be an Uzbek. We're still, Saida Hone, Mrs. Mirzioyeva, I'm excuse my language. I am no ass kisser. Okay. I'm a cowboy from Arizona, man. I'll give it to you straight. But I thought her speech at the Jadi conference was really good. We're debating about apostrophes and declension marks with, how to spell things in the Uzbek language. Like, come on, man. Let's get over it. I read Uzbek in Cyrillic. Because that's how I learned Uzbek, and I'm not going to take the time to screw around with this shit.
A lot of mental work,
yeah. So, do you want me to translate and put out books, or do you want me screwing around with declension marks in Uzbek? Right. But she's right. Let's make a decision upon what our language is, what our culture is, what our leadership model is, and just get on with it. After 30 years, like, come on, man. So yes, but Americans and Westerners get this really condescending, arrogant view of studying the Soviet mind or the former Soviet people. They come and they like to preach about this stuff. Yet, we've got a president that's been indicted 91 times. Like, shut your mouth about democracy until we figure it out, So,
it's a process, right?
It's a process. Yes, it's an organic process.
Right.
And I truly believe that, again, I'm not a paid stooge of the Uzbek government. Democracy is going to take the form that the Uzbeks agree upon. And it does not have to look like American democracy.
Right.
It doesn't have to look like French democracy or English. Right. It has to be what I like the term in Islamic law, ijma, or consensus, is the hadith that says that as a community, we cannot agree upon a mistake. So what I want to see is I'm not a former Soviet specialist. My first language was not Russian. I'm not a child of the Cold War. The Soviet Union fell apart, and all of these people who spoke only Russian, only knew the Soviet Union, tried to reinvent themselves as regional specialists. My context has always been a Peace Corps volunteer who served in Kokand with a newly independent republic. I could give a damn about the Soviet Union.
Very interesting. Okay, we have a comment that came up on Instagram.
Okay.
I had to 1 second. I had to basically copy and paste in our comment section from Dastanbek Shkurov. Very good job, Mark. Are there any plans to translate any Uzbek literature works? So, I mean, the reason why we invited Mark to our today's interview is because he already did a good job on translation of the book called Kunlar, which every Uzbek is most likely familiar with. Let me pull it up. I just did a little bit of not a research, but tried to learn about it. I see that it's on Amazon. If you'd like to purchase it, it's already available, and I can see that price is very reasonable. And I was gonna say the rating is really good. Look at that, 4.9 out of 35. That's great work. And I also I was looking at the Goodreads, and they usually are very conservative when it comes to rating books. The highest rating they have is around 3.9. If you have 3.9, that means it's a 5-star on Amazon and everywhere else. But here I see 4.4 out of 172 reviews on Goodreads. Good job. I mean,
I'm trying. I tried. It took me 15 years to get the book into English.
15 years? Really?
Yes.
No way.
Yes. Life intervened, but I did it with no support until the very end. Farhad Inangambayev at Oppenheimer and Farid Maksudi really helped me with final editing costs and
Right.
layout and design and the artwork. So they helped make it the beautiful book that it is now. The same thing, I'd like to give a shout out to the United Cement Group in Tashkent. They helped out towards the very end with Hashimov. So I was able to hire some really great people to come in and look at the book and to review it and to do the beautiful artwork. So speaking of the artwork, I'll send it to you, Hasanaka, but on the 31st of March till the 27th of April, there will be an advert on the 42nd Street Metro stop, Grand Central Station 7 line. There'll be an advertisement for Hashimov's Dunyoning Ishlade.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's the first advertisement of Uzbek literature on mass transit in America.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say I'll do my best to help you advertise as much as I can on our social media platforms, and I also try to reach out to some other social media, what do you call them, bloggers and stuff, and it should definitely reach as many people as possible, because you put 15 years of work, which is half of my lifetime. A lot of work, and it's a big deal for Uzbeks. You know, we want to be heard. You know, people know Tolstoy, people know Dostoevsky, which is Russian big. You know, they wrote masterpieces of Russian literature, right? But nobody knows about Alisher Navai or Abdullah Qadri. They had really good work, you know, and people have to read, and not only Uzbeks and everybody else. Not because we want them to know about us, but they also had some, what do you call them, Eastern wisdom, and there's some beauty in it as well, you know. Okay, I'm not a very intelligent person, but I'll do my best to help you, you know, help your book to reach as many people as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Also, another comment that came in, Dostanbek Shkurov. I think I already put this up, right?
Well, to answer his questions is, you know, I guess what I hit with Farhad Aka and Farid Aka and then United Cement Group is the only way this is really going to happen is if the Uzbek government and Uzbek businessmen really do the philanthropy that is necessary to get these works into English. The money is there. The money is there. Okay. But, you know, American analysts observe Central Asia. And when you show them what's important to you, they take note of that. Right. So what you're doing by showing them Uzbek literature is, one, you're taking them away from the Soviet model of understanding Uzbekistan. Right. You're giving them a new context, a new understanding of the cultural landscape that the social sciences are not going to be able to provide. And so, you know, by these companies and by the government really getting behind this, and there are some initiatives out there to translate further Uzbek work, but to be crass about it, you know, I did both books for free with no money for the love of the sport. There's a little bit of a sad story behind Ukan Kunlar is when our first son passed away. We had another son coming, and I said, at the end of the day, when I die, when am I going to leave my son? You know, when am I going to give him that he's going to be able to say that my father did something? I don't want him to know about what I did in Afghanistan. I want him to know about what I did with Ukan Kunlar and now Dunyoning Ishlade. But now, you know, there are no plans. I have no plans to translate anything else unless I get financial support. You know, but I do have people in Tashkent reaching out to me about translating Qadiri's other great work, Mehrabdan Shayan, which I think is a much more literary wise. I think Qadiri really comes into his own brilliance in Mehrabdan Shayan, but I'm not going to do it for free. I hate to be crass about it. You know, so that's the frustrating part, is that we've got Christopher Ford Shelley Fairweather Vega is a
Right.
fantastic translator. Chris is a fantastic translator. Nick Walmsley, who knows Navajo like the back of his hand, Dr. Nick Walmsley, has a PhD from Indiana and has translated hundreds of Navajo dastans.
Really?
Yeah, there's people out there that can do the work. We just need help from business interests and from the Uzbek government so that we don't have to go around like paupers.
Right.
You know? Like help a brother out here, you know. So, but I do think with this reformed government, I do think that we're getting close to seeing that type of philanthropy. Like you live in Miami, you've lived in New York. Let me ask you this:
Yep.
a really good journalist friend posed this to me the other day. When
Right.
I say Rockefeller,
Mhm.
Carnegie, Vanderbilt, how did they make their money? Nobody knows. You have
No
to
idea.
Google it, right? But you know Carnegie Hall and Rockefeller Center with the ice skating rink,
Mhm.
Central Park, the Met, the Vanderbilt University, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, just down the road. My wife got a degree there. My brother got his PhD there. I know, Julie, like how Vanderbilt built a university after the Civil War,
Right.
but I can't quite tell you how he became an oligarch. So what I would pose to the businesses in Uzbekistan that are making quite a lot of money with an increased GDP is no one's going to remember you from the building that you built. Okay, or how you made your money. They're going to remember you the same decision I made after I lost my first son, by Ukan Kunlar, by some sort of cultural artifact that you can put forward that's going to outlive your lifespan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that's big work, right? So
Dastanika, where are you located? He's asking
yeah.
for my autograph for my translation.
Yep. Let us know in details, and hopefully, maybe
I can figure
at
it
one
out. Yeah.
point, if you visit Uzbekistan, maybe you attend some event, and it happens to be that maybe he's there, and you guys can meet up, and he can get your autograph. But thanks
We're-
for attention, everyone.
We're working on a couple of deals in Tashkent to have Ukan Kunlar and Dunyoning printed locally, which is not happening right now. It's only available on Amazon. So we're working on some deals now to try to make that happen. And I am more than happy to sit at a chaihana for a week and sign books for whoever brings them by.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As we were talking, a lot of questions popped up.
Okay.
Let me ask them away before the time runs out. We already reached 58 minutes. Maybe let's take another 10, 15 minutes if you're down. If you don't,
Sure.
if you're not in a rush, don't have much stuff to do. You mentioned that relations with Uzbekistan past 2005. When things changed, right? There's a big conflict in Azerbaijan where I was born. How did it impact your career or your how to say that?
Totally
Your
destroyed
life?
my career.
Sure.
Yeah.
What happened? If you could just go into details, like.
Well, I mean, look, man, I had all of the markers that the old Soviet mind, and a lot of this still persists today. I'm going to be straightforward about this. When you look up Peace Corps in the Soviet encyclopedia, it says the cover for the CIA. Okay. Mark goes to work at K2, right? And this notorious base. And not only did I work at K2, I was at K2 when Andijan occurred. So I wake up one morning and my translators that I'm managing go, "Did you hear something happened in Andijan?" I'm like, "No." I didn't listen to the news when I was at K2. I was reading James Joyce's Ulysses at night. I met my wife at K2. So we were drinking tea. I was trying to get to know this girl that I met and I was falling in love with. And then one morning we were making plans about the rest of our life together. And then all of a sudden, one of the translators says, "Did you hear about what happened in Andijan?" I have no idea. And he said, "Well, it looks like some Uzbek soldiers shot some people in Andijan." And and I'll save you the colorful language, like, oh my God, like I just couldn't believe what had happened.
Yes.
But also, people are going to have to forgive me on this. You're dealing with an extreme cynic who had already, at that point, had spent 2 months in Afghanistan. And I follow the singer-songwriter who passed away, Lou Reed. I don't believe anything I read. I don't believe half of what I see. And that is especially true in warfare. I've seen warfare and I've seen combat. I have been a combat translator. And anyone around you who says they understand completely what was happening around them at the time is an idiot. Okay. So I'm this kind of bridge at this point because you have John McCain from Arizona, mouthing off about what needs to be done with Uzbekistan. But on the other hand, I don't think that Americans really understood how much face Islam Karimov committed by having that military base in Uzbekistan at all. Manas and K2 were the first 2 American military bases ever in the history of the former Soviet Union. Right. So Islam Karimov lets us come to Afghanistan or Uzbekistan to have this base. Something happens in Andijan, and this is just my personal opinion. Right. And John McCain starts talking before he completely understands what the situation was. So at that point, Islam Karimov's lost face by he invites the Americans over for dinner. And then we take this really arrogant tone with what's happening in Andijan, with what happened in Andijan.
When you say we, you're talking about the American media, or you as an organization, or what are you referring to?
That's a good point, because there is no real we in a sense. That I'm thinking more specifically like John McCain mouthing off before, calling for an investigation. Like, of course, there's going to be an investigation. But not understanding Uzbek culture and not understanding that there's a way to go about this, and being the blustery, pushy American is not the way to handle the situation.
Yep.
And I also believe, I'm actually not supporting President Karimov here. I'm just saying, my understanding is just this cross-cultural communication. So when that happened, President Karimov reacts by kicking us off this military base. But you're talking, all the people that are working on the military base really believed in U.S. presence in Uzbekistan. That's the reason they were willing to work there. We were paying a lot of money for translators to come there, right? But they're former Soviets, and former Soviets have a really good understanding about what happens when you are on the wrong side of history. Right? So all of these people who had committed to supporting American presence in Uzbekistan are all of a sudden in this position of, holy crap, Uzbekistan, because I worked with the Americans. Right. So as a repercussion to all this, I don't mind saying it's been many, many years now, but I couldn't get a visa to Uzbekistan until President Mirziyoyev became president. I did go in 2012 on official travel with the U.S. Naval Academy, and I described it, the midshipmen, the young future Naval and Marine Corps officers I was showing Uzbekistan to. They said that we've never seen a country where there's like this national depression. And I had to explain Andijan and how things are not going well in this republic. And it's kind of a pariah. So by 2017, I'm standing, I have my BBC interview about Kunlar, and I get an invite to go to the Uzbek embassy. And there's this new ambassador, Javlan Vahabov, who just got his credentials. And to be honest, Hassan Akha, I was cynical. I thought, oh man, it's going to be another guy with a mustache and a comb over in a gray suit. Like, do I really want to go to the embassy? I thought with the BBC interview, when I finished Kunlar, I was done with Central Asia. I'm never going to get a visa. I'm never gonna be able to collaborate and get back to what it is I love to do. But this is my love ladder.
And it had already become part of your life, right? Like your life story that's associated with Uzbekistan has become
Yeah.
part of your life, and losing this opportunity or closing this chapter is very, very hard. I mean, especially
it's devastating. And I'm not the only one. I'm not going to name names, but there's lots of quote unquote Central Asianists at that point that couldn't get visas back to Uzbekistan during that period. It was devastating. With me, literally, I have a wife from Uzbekistan,
right.
and I don't know what's going to happen to her family.
Mm-hmm.
I can't protect them, if something political happens.
Uh-huh.
But with 2017, I'm standing in an embassy. There's this young ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
He's dynamic, but I'm seeing all these younger Uzbek, I can call them kids now, but they're all good friends, that helped me with Kunlar and getting it out there. But these are all the people who were part of the Umid Fund, who were part of exchange programs.
Big deal back in the days, yeah.
I got to meet Nalpahar Imamova, Gap Yoke. She's got a Harvard sticker on her phone. All of these people from the 90s that we all fought for to get them to the States and to learn and to become global citizens are now global citizens holding these leadership perspectives. So there was a level of excitement in the embassy that night that kind of melted my heart. I went into the embassy with this cold heart, and by the time I left, I thought, okay, I'm glad that this version of Kunlar, my life's work, my career's work, came out at the time of a reform president. Alhamdulillah, like Allah gives us a way of not necessarily what we want, but what we need. I really needed a reform president.
You're more Uzbek than me. Awesome. Another comment came up. Looking forward to your new translation, On the Edge of My Seat. Awesome. Thanks for your attention. Also, another comment from the same guy, Dostonbek Shukurov. I know it required immense hard work, so how many people worked to translate Kunlar? I mean, maybe you had a team or you did it all by yourself. I mean, it took you 15 years, and did it justify spending resources at the end of the day?
Oh yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. It's a two-part question. I consulted with probably hundreds of people. Anyone who knows me knows that for 15 years ago, I was walking around like the Rain Man, a complete idiot, asking questions about various phrases. But I really credit Umida Hikmatullaeva and Umida Hashimova. I think Umida Hikmatullaeva is still in Indiana, and I think Umida Hashimova is still in DC. But they're the ones that reviewed the book and really found like hundreds of mistakes. Writing is revision, and so I revised this thing many times. So Umida Hikmatullaeva did volume 1, and by the time I got the rhythm with volume 1, volume 2 and 3 was a little bit easier. But for many years, I ran into a number of hucksters that were going to help me. And back then there was no intellectual property right law. There was no copyright law. So it was just a fact of getting that type of work done in Uzbekistan that if you ever gave your manuscript to somebody, it was gone. So a lot of the enemies I made working on Kunlar were people that I knew were simply trying to steal it. And I just wasn't going to give them the time of day. And I called, I'm a guy from Arizona, I'll call you out on it. I'll look you in the eye and tell you, go drink tea. Expenses, if you took my average income at the time, as the value of my time, and you time that over 15 to 20 years, now 20 years promoting the book and everything, you're talking about $2 million of value that's attached to it. And, so I've got this media portfolio. 5 years ago, I was really optimistic about getting it funded, and now 5 years later, I'm having a really hard time getting it funding. But it's a big number.
Yep.
You know, I mean, Turkey gets this. You know, you can't turn on Netflix today without finding a Turkish serial, right?
Yeah.
So when you go to a Turkish bookstore in Istanbul and Para, you know, they get the fact that you have to invest in this type of stuff in order to give
Absolutely.
your country context. Investors want it. You know, investors in Wall Street are smart, educated people.
Right.
They want when their small talk is football and what book they're reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
And New York is very much of a literary city.
Pretty much,
people in DC will brag about what book they're reading, right? That's what we geeks talk about, right? So that's the one area in Uzbekistan I see today where I don't see a lot of a concerted effort to develop this type of content. You know, you will not have a successful tourism program without content.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? You know, why do people go to Disney? They go to Disney because of the content, the experience.
Absolutely. Wow. It's a great way to think about it, to be honest. It definitely helps tourism to grow as well, right? I mean, you're creating pretty much cultural awareness in the West, and the more people reads the book, the more, you know, they become interested in Central Asia and its history, and its, you know, they would want to visit. And I'm sure that this book is somehow associated with the fact that you were awarded, I forgot the name.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What's the name? Awareness of Uzbek language and culture. Yeah, you were awarded at the beginning. I just mentioned something I forgot.
Tourism Federation.
Yeah, tourism. Yes, right. I'm sure it's associated with that. But thank you guys for your attention. Keep the questions coming. We have a few more minutes to go, and I have a lot of questions that I haven't asked, but I'll try to be picky and you know, throw the questions at you. And
okay.
Let's see.
I'll give you shorter answers this time.
Yeah, sounds good. And then let's talk about your life in Qilgan a little bit, in a more cultural sense. How was your life? Let's say, how did you assimilate with the local people? How did you, you know, get comfortable with the culture there? Because you're an American, you're not even coming from another Asian country, right? You're coming completely from a completely different country with different experiences, right? How was this experience, this transition?
Well, I'm a bit of a hippie. I mean, I really believe that there's only one race. It's the human race. That regardless of your language differences and your cultural differences, we all love our kids. We all want better for our children.
Yep.
We all want to learn about the world around us, right? And the challenge for me was the fact that I was group 2. So I was one of 2 original volunteers in Qilgan. So Oxacals would come up to me and say, "Assalamu alaikum, Mehman," you know, says, "Amerikalik, Mrs." I said, yeah, I'm American. Well, I've heard about Americans. I've seen Americans in movies, but I've never met one. Come and have some tea with me.
Can we switch to Uzbek a little bit for the next couple of minutes or so that
sure.
people can, you know, hear you speaking Uzbek finally?
Yeah, sure. So man iki yarim yıl Qilganda dagi yashagan edim. Toksan tortinchi yıldan altinchi gacha. Man yurik mahala birincisini men bir joya öyle bir havlada yaşagan edim. Joya familia. Lakin ularning kızı balki 15 yaş kirgan. So şunun için toy sufçilarını hardoyum kiri yaptılar. Yeah, but kim? Bu Amerikalik Mehman. Like, so bundan kiyen balki bir yıldan kiyen ben kuartiyada Zakimas'tan yırgımı üçüncü maktabda yaşagan edim. Bu paytada judikiyen edi. Çünkü men mahalada yaşaganım yok. I'm really butchering Uzbek right now.
That's
So
fun.
like lekin mahala yashayotganimda, hammasi mening hammasi shunaqa familiyalarni ularning o'g'li. Mark, siz mehmonga keling, siz plov yeng. Siz kasolmisiz? Choy iching, limon topgan edim. So choy iching is lekin kvartira yashayotganimda shunaqa yordam yo'q edilar. So juda sopol keyin gaz kam edi, suv kam edi. Lekin menimcha ayniqsa Qo'qonlik, Farg'onalik men eng zo'r fikrlarini menga o'rgatdi. Misol uchun adobli, adob. So in my life, the most important philosophical idea is the idea of adob.
Oh, wow.
Of politeness, how to take care of a guest. Meaning hayotimda ham Islam eng katta ta'sir bergan. Man Oroq ichmayman. Svinina kerak emas. Lekin Islom diniyat mening hayotim eng katta ta'sir bergan. Ayniqsa Qo'qon yashayotganimda 95-yil men Hayit bilan qatnashgan edim. Men shahada deb aytdim. Islom qabul qildim. Mening hayotimga tasavvuf eng katta ta'sir bergan. So I'm kind of like a cowboy Sufi.
Cowboy Sufi. Cowboy from America.
Yeah.
Nice. I heard some very cultural words such as, solchilar, odob, flambine, Haid Bayram. Those are very, core cultural, what do you call them? Fundamentals of Uzbek culture, I would say. And I think Qo'qon is a great place to discover Uzbek culture because it has a big, rich history, and it's in the center of Fergana Valley, and awesome. That's great.
I must have gone to Hadura Han's Urda every other day.
Oh wow!
Just to sit with these, all of these guys that were working there were old Soviet experts. Probably old KGB. This guy was a translator in Iraq. This guy was a translator in Syria, and just sit and listen to these guys talk and try to improve my Uzbek. But again, I had more questions than answers when I left Qo'qon, and that's why I went on to graduate school.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually kind of am ashamed to admit the fact that I didn't read the book Kunlar properly as an Uzbek, but I had to tap into what it is about through your book. I read the English description of it. Otabek, the son of Yusuf Bek Haji, is a 19th century Muslim reformer and trader, and as soon to be husband of two wives, who takes us through a Turkestan 20 years before a Russian conquest, from teeming caravansarais, mosques, and charkhanas of Tashkent and Margilan to the inner sanctum of Qo'qon Khanlige. Our hero bears witness to a world heading into a future of memory and loss, offering reform and resistance as the only hope to save the soul of a people. Not just Otabek, but his friends and enemies alike face a cultural and political landscape of family obligations and ethnic conflict, and a Khanat lost to corruption and intrigue. At stake for Otabek and his loved ones is not only the destruction of a way of life, a word cast within the traditions of the Turco-Persian world, but a crisis of faith and identity that have persisted for 100 years and 150 years. Published in 1926, the author Abdullah Qadri brought his masterpiece to a leadership beset with the same concern as those of the beloved characters of his historical novel. Qadri uses the lessons of the past as a warning to his own generation experiencing the politically charged period after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Many describe the novel as a guide to the same issues that Uzbek society contends with today in what is now seen as the national narrative of modern Uzbekistan, perhaps its origin story. Yeah, that's now I see why you picked that specific book, because it's more relatable. It's before the post-Soviet, and when you come to the U.S. or Europe, you understand that a lot of people associate Uzbekistan only with the Soviet time, but it actually had a much richer and longer history than what people know, right? Awesome. What was so impressive about this novel? One of the last questions for you.
I think, how passionate people are about it in Tashkent, and everyone has an opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you, at a time when in Uzbekistan you could not speak freely about things as much as you could today, everyone had an opinion on Kunlar.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned more about people's worldview that they may not be able to express openly, right? I would argue that when you go to Amir Timur's grave in Samarkand, Goramir, and you lay flowers at his grave, you are really remembering the Jadids. Uzbek culture is not always about what's said, it's about what's not said. And so we name our sons Timur, we name our sons Otabek and Kamush and Zainab because of the relationship to the Prophet. But also we name our kids Anvar and Rano from Mehrabdan Chayan. But so I would argue that the Jadid's murder in 1938 is the beginning of memory and loss. You had a system that was trying to tell you what you could and could not remember, what you could and could not talk about. And it gets back to the translators at K2 and Andijan occurred, that deep-seated Soviet fear that I am on the wrong side of history.
Right.
So when you murder a generation of intellectuals in 1938, you leave this trauma that is either spoken or unspoken in Uzbekistan, right? And with all due respect to the Timurids, I'm no anti-Timurid, but Amir Timur and Ulugbek and all these incredible figures from history, they're great to refer to, but they don't have as much relevance as the Jadids due to the present generation. It's a form, and I would even argue with Hashimov now, it's a generation of people that are still with us today. So when I translated Utkan Kunlar, my real moment was really in 2012 when I took that visit to Uzbekistan with the midshipmen. That trip, I also got to meet Khandamir Qadiri, the grandson of Abdullah Qadiri. And I got choked up. Like, I've been working on this book forever. Then all of a sudden I'm standing and looking at Abdullah Qadiri's grandson, the grandson of a man who was murdered in 1938. And it's kind of that moment when you say to yourself, man, don't screw this up. You know what I mean? So, so many people, like when I came back from Peace Corps, kind of a good thought to leave with on Ramazan. But, my mother asked, what's it like living with Muslims? And, how is that, kind of this tentative sort of question? I'm like, Mom, Muslims fed me when they had nothing left back in their kitchen in the 90s, right? They fed me when I was hungry. They took care of me when I was on the road. Back then, the safe place to always sit on the bus is at the front with all the old ladies, right? All the bad boys sitting in the back of the bus, right? Drinking vodka, being Yigitlar. If you sat at the front of the bus in the 90s, all the old ladies fed you. And nobody messes with the old ladies. Nobody, right? So, these people fed me at a time when there was not much food to go around. Leaves an impression.
Very interesting perspective, and I didn't expect this kind of conversation, to be honest. But it's great. as you mentioned, on a fundamental level, we all want the same thing. And I like the fact that, what you said, which is I'm happy in the sense that we're all one human race. That's absolutely true. And we might have some differences in culture and, religion and etc. But at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. And one thing you learned from Uzbek culture is, I think you already mentioned, which is adab lilik or adab, right?
Right.
That may not be directly translated into English or, into English or Western culture, I would say. And then it's not about what's said when it comes to Uzbekistan or Uzbek culture, but it's more about what's not said. There's so much that people don't know about Uzbekistan, its history and culture and etc. Right? And another question, maybe you have partially answered this question, but from Akbar Muminov, what are some lessons you learned from the story O'tgan Kunlar? Any lesson that you learned or anything else that you want to mention?
Well, so today when we're done, I'm driving with my family to Oxford, Mississippi, which is one of the great literary centers of America. It's the home of William Faulkner, Harper Lee. Man, I want to say Truman Capote lived there for a while, at least. It is one of our great literary centers. And the reason why I put Qadiri at the same level as our William Faulkner, and I do not say that lightly, is because Qadiri, who writes about loss, who all the themes that he covers, affects a guy from Arizona in a way at a human level. So I don't consider him just an Uzbek author. That leaves him in a region. I consider him part of world literature. And I'm really happy that the Jadids are finally getting their acknowledgement as contributors, not just to Uzbek literature, but contributors to world literature. And, the place of women in Islam, the place of government in Islam, the place of adab, how to treat a stranger, the way Usta Alim in the novel takes care of Otabek, this traveler on the road, these things. All of these people I've met in Central Asia, and really had a profound impact on my life. And they're people that I admire and that I aspire still at 55 years old to be.
Wow. Very sentimental words.
Yeah, I'm a weepy kind of guy that way. I'm a bit of a poet.
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate it a lot. Awesome. So Qadri's work is not only Uzbek work, but it's part of the wider world literature, right? I like how you describe it. The last question that I want to ask, sorry, I want to be
It's okay.
Respectful. You probably know what Americans can probably learn from the Uzbek culture, which is adab or respect to elders and etc. Right? But one thing that Uzbeks can learn from the Americans. Anything that you think Uzbeks can learn from Americans or from the, let's say, Western culture that could help even become a little bit I don't know, more progressive, or I don't know, maybe it's an unexpected question for you.
No, I've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
And one of the main cross-cultural challenges I have sometimes is that when I am being direct with someone in Tashkent, and I had recently a really tough conversation where I looked at the guy and I said, I respect you, but if you do that, I'm going to beat your ass. Okay. Do not do this because A, B, and C. And that directness is in America, especially in my culture, is the most profound sign of respect. Direct. Because I respect you so much, I'm going to be honest and direct with you. If I don't, if I'm going to, play games and beat around the bush or not tell you directly, I am being indirect, and thus I am being disrespectful to you. So it's challenging for me sometimes when people are expecting me to figure out, and I'm like, why don't you just look me in the eye and tell me direct? No. right? Like I'll give a proposal that I think will change the face of the literary landscape in Central Asia. Just say no, right? Like don't say, well, maybe, bis kuramas pasmothram. I'm like, damn it. Kuramas is your way of saying no. And in my culture, it's really disrespectful. Just say no. Say no. Just don't bullshit me, right? So there's part of that. There's the man, it's so tough. I would respectfully argue, like right now I'm going to Oxford, Mississippi, and I'm rereading one of Faulkner's novels called Soldier's Pay. It's his first novel. It was written the same year as Kunlar. All right. I have met many Uzbek businessmen and diplomats and government people who don't know the first damn thing about the American cultural landscape. A lot of them are fed stuff from Russia. Let's just be honest here. Sure. They're fed things from the media. They take a particular political stance because it's closer to what they think is going to be their world belief system. Yep. But I really wish that, there's a rumor that Kunlar my version made its way into a very high level of the U.S. government. A very high level person in the U.S. government has read Kunlar and liked it. Okay. Wow. I would like the same level of engagement from Uzbek government officials with Faulkner and Hemingway and Harper Lee. I would love to have a Gap Gurungi, a Suhbat, some Palav. I'll buy Palav at a Chaihana of their choice, and just to talk about American culture and history and politics. I'm not asking you to believe in anything.
Yep.
Right. I'm asking you to understand that it's complicated.
Yep.
Right. That any issue that goes on in Uzbekistan is complicated. And the same applies for the United States. And absolutely. So I think that there's an enormous misunderstanding in Uzbekistan about what American culture is about and what it represents. And I still believe as a patriot that it's the land of opportunity. I still believe that if you work hard, especially if you're an Uzbek, my wife came here. Of course, she had some help through me, but, I didn't help her with her degree at Vanderbilt.
Right.
She's now a nurse practitioner that does post-kidney transplant support. Very serious medical care. It's not Mark Reese that helped her with that. If it was me, they'd all be dead by now. Okay. It's Yelena Kadyrova from Chilonzar, Tashkent's brilliance that is the reason why she's successful in America. And so I would ask my Uzbek colleagues in Tashkent to get past all the propaganda and to just have good, honest conversations with Americans about American language, literature, culture, politics, the whole nine yards. Invite me to some Palav. I'd love to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely. Very unexpected, but I'm sure you're well connected in Uzbekistan with a lot of people. But I'd love to connect you with some people that I know personally and would definitely be interested in your work and what you're doing, which is a big deal, which should be a big deal for a lot of Uzbeks. And awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for everything you're doing and for your time today to share your story, unique story. I personally enjoyed it a lot, to be honest. I didn't expect so much, to be honest. I didn't know you're so much well connected to the Uzbek culture and you know so much about it. Yeah, I feel like there's Uzbek in you living.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, the first thing you mentioned is like you're a hybrid of you're a hybrid basically, right? You're American, but you have embraced a lot of Uzbek in you, I would say. Just like ourselves, for example, who are living in America, whether you want it or not, at the end of the day, you copy certain manners, certain characters, certain behaviors of the local people. It happens, right? Maybe we became a little bit more direct than the people in Uzbekistan, etc. But that's awesome. This cultural exchange has to happen more often than than we see now. And any final words that you want to share?
Well, it's Ramadan, so I really wish. I mean, it's a special time,
Absolutely.
and I just really wish everyone, Ramadan Mubarak, and enjoy the period. It's that time of the year where we all take a step back and think about what we've been given and how fortunate we are. And the thing that the Uzbeks taught me, starting in Peace Corps, and especially through Islam, is the idea of compassion. Mm-hmm. And this is the time of the year for that. So I'm glad that Dunyoning Ishlade, it wasn't really planned, but I'm glad that it's coming out during Ramadan and during Nowruz. And I'd like to conclude with the book. It was supported by United Cement Group. But all of the mistakes in the book are Mark Rees's. All of the victories are the Uzbek people. So thank you for your time, Hassan Aka. I'm glad that we finally got around to getting this.
Thank you so much, Rahmat Kattakon. O'zbek tilida sizga tilaylarim shu ishlaringizga omad, kelajakdagi nima deydi, translation deymiz, tarjimalaringizga ham omad tilab qolamiz. Qo'ldan kelgancha albatta barcha kuzatuvchilar qo'llab-quvvatlash kerak deb o'ylayman, chunki bu O'zbekistonni nafaqat Amerikada, balki umuman g'arb dunyosida bizni yaxshiroq biladi odamlar bu orqali, ya'ni adabiyot odamlarni yaqinlashtiradi-ku. Iloji boricha qo'llab-quvvatlaymiz. Agar kimdadir qanaqadir murojaatlar bo'lsa, savollar bo'lsa, marhamat, LinkedIn orqali Mark Rees deb yozsanglar chiqib keladi. Aloqaga chiqishinglar mumkin, taklifinglar bo'lsa bildirishinglar mumkin. Barchaga xayrli kun tilab qolamiz. Ramazon oyida hammaga sabr tilab qolamiz. Kuninglar yaxshi o'tsin. Rahmat.
Rahmat aka. Gaplashamiz aka.
Sog' bo'ling. Rahmat.
Sog' bo'ling. Ko'p xayr.